I just wrapped this week's live discussion on Substack. So let me just quickly give you an overview of what we discussed, which is Donald Trump's pro-Putin plank and how that is imploding. We talked about his economic prowess and how that is imploding. We talked about his pro-criminal stance and how that is imploding. And finally, we talked about cruelty and incompetence part two, because we saw it already in Trump 1.0, the first administration, but we're seeing it again. And I started with the SpaceX explosion because when I keep on talking about imploding, it's like a manna from heaven, because you cannot imagine a better sort of depiction of what is going on in this administration than Elon Musk's SpaceX rocket imploding, crashing, and burning. So without further ado, stay tuned for the full discussion. Okay, it's 11 o'clock, so welcome everybody. Before I start talking about the various topics, I have a few, as they say, housekeeping matters. I was thinking of calling this a fireside chat because you can't see it, but just to my right is a fireplace. So, and it seems also nice to have an homage to a really great president, FDR. So, also, thanks to everybody. A couple of weeks ago, we did a bit of a crowdsource on what would make these fireside chats better. We're going to do that again, depending on how this goes. Hopefully, it'll go okay. But one of the things that we got as a suggestion is for people to not only give me ideas of what they'd like to hear about, but then for me to go through that and then put out to you all what the topics will be, so that you sort of have an idea of what I'm going to talk about, and you can decide whether it's of interest or not. And I just thought that was a really good idea. It also makes it easier for me because then I'm not both looking at you and sort of reading the live chat at the same time, which can be difficult. I haven't mastered the technique of doing that, as well as the few times I've had to use a teleprompter when I've been sitting in an anchor chair. Let's just say it's not been pretty. So so thanks for all of that. The other thing we're going to try is at about 11:30 when we're done, I'm going to keep the chat open, keep this live, so that if you want to essentially communicate with each other and give ideas and talk about things, and then also it's something that I can sort of look at and see what people are thinking and talking about. Well, we're going to keep that open and see how that goes, so that this is more of a dialogue. And then finally, I know that Ines was here as my warm-up act. I had my 11-year-old Cocker Spaniel, English Cocker Spaniel, which is very different than an American Cocker Spaniel, although it's so funny in England, they're just called Cocker Spaniels, as you can understand. And he is the contrarian pet of the week. So for those of you who subscribe or look at the Contrarian, which I highly recommend for a whole variety of reasons, you will see a really cute picture of Innes, all ready for his close-up. So, so with that, I think that's probably the best lighthearted part of this. And then I'm now going to turn to something more substantive. So I just came back from doing the weekend show with MSNBC, and the main topic there, and Michael Steele was very much pushing this, which was the idea of the courts won't be enough, and that if you are putting all of your salvation in the courts, that's a mistake. And he phrased it very carefully, which was, he's not saying that they're not important, he was just saying they won't be sufficient. And I could not agree more. I think that the courts are an important bulwark. They have been playing that role in part, particularly at the lower court levels, but even we saw this week with a 5-4 decision with Amy Coney Barrett and the Chief Justice siding with the three so-called liberal justices. They do have an important role to play, but I think they, in many ways, have more of a signaling function to signal to the American public what is going on. So I was thinking about the topics that I'm going to talk about today all sort of relate to that issue, that the courts, some of the things I'll talk about relate to things that are, in my view, illegal or certainly legally questionable, but ways to talk about what is going on that can lead to people, a greater number of people sort of waking up and seeing what's happening, the sort of get real and part of this, which is you may not have thought Project 2025 was going to happen, but it is. And it both relates to where we are, but also the most common question that I get, which is, what can I do about it? And I think some of that has to do with how we talk about what is going on and the deep unpopularity of what is happening. And there's a lot of things that are noise and things that may be not deeply unpopular. So immigration and DEI may be things that many of us are very upset about, but may not be sort of a winning strategy to affect the polls, and which is really where the power is, which is what are people thinking? And I thought I'd go through various things that go to that issue of, yes, there are legal components to it, but I think it's really important to talk about it in terms of how it can affect um, people's reactions to what Donald Trump and his minions are doing. So the first of those has to do with the fact that Donald Trump ran very much as, I'm a businessman, I'm an outsider, leave aside that he had been the president for 4 years, but that he's good at business. And let's just take what is going on with the economy. It has not gotten better. It is true that it's only recent, but the the candidate Trump had said on day one things would be better, and he turned things around. Everything was going to happen sort of immediately. And sort of the so-called price of eggs has gone up. Nothing has gotten better. And tariffs are a perfect example. Everybody, up to and including the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which, by the way, when you lose the Wall Street Journal editorial page and you're a conservative, something's wrong. But you have Donald Trump saying, "I'm going to impose tariffs," and then he said, "I'm going to," and then he didn't, and now he's like, "I'm going to," and 2 days later he backtracks and withdraws some of them. It is important for people to know, what does that tell you? It tells you that the idea was wrong and stupid and counterproductive. And every economist said this was going to backfire. And that is, in fact, what happened. And so I think it's a really good way of sort of dealing with the sort of emperor has no clothes, which is the person who is supposed to be good at business, who is saying we should impose tariffs, is starting a sort of a tit for tat trade war with not just China and Mexico, but of all countries, Canada. So, which is not exactly our natural enemy. And so I think that the attack on his sort of economic prowess and the idea that he had some sort of economic expertise is super important. That it is a facade. It's a facade as thin and as shallow as the TV show that he was running. And the problem is that if you have a sort of TV kabuki theater president doing this, is that you see that exactly this kind of backfire. So the main question, and I think the media needs to be sort of focusing on this, is like, when you backtrack, that is because it was a mistake from somebody who has said that he is a leader. So I think that's sort of one sort of nail in the coffin that has to be sort of stressed, is that issue, that The main claim to fame, the thing that's sort of the quote pocketbook issue, is not working. Thanks for listening. That was a portion of what I am doing on Substack, where there is a longer version where I cover a lot more. This was just one of the topics of 4 that I covered this week. So if you're interested, you can go over to Substack over there. There's a link. Or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel and you'll get the free content, which is a portion of it. And you saw a bit of a preview today, which is I thought that the SpaceX explosion, the crash and burn, could not have been a better illustration of what we are seeing writ large from this administration. So if you want more of that, subscribe here on YouTube or go to Substack and you can get a fuller discussion from things that I'm doing there. Thanks for listening.